Okay, this is Justin's Morning Coffee, and I'm here with Andrea with the bangs. This actually, Andrea, you don't know this. This is my very first interview on my channel. Everything
Yay!
so far has been just me talking to the camera.
Well, good. That's hard. So good for you, because I know, which is why I don't do it a ton. Just
So
me
you,
by myself.
so you've been in the YouTube world for longer than me. You've been having conversations on YouTube for a long time, and so you're probably better at it than me. And you've been exploring.
It depends. When you're in certain modes, if you're in host mode, it's like a little bit more bridled. But when
Right.
it's when I'm out in the wild where I'm like, I'm the guest. Oh no, I might be going off on who knows whatever rabbit trails, but please continue.
Okay, so I'm sure probably people know more about you than me at this point, because my channel is very small. But I've just told you before we started recording, I've been doing a deep dive into story structure. I've been really interested in what makes a story good, and I've been kind of trying to go back to the archetypes, back to the source of storytelling, and really get at what its essence is. So I took my beginning with story with this book, The Seven Basic Plots by Christopher Booker. And I liked it because I've always felt a little weird about the hero's journey, because I found that it didn't actually help me write very well. It seemed to kind of stifle my creativity instead of help my creativity. And I think it was because I was just trying to, it felt formulaic, and I was trying to fit things into that kind of formula. And the Seven Basic Plots for me was a bit more of a kind of like an opening up of like a plethora of story moods or feelings or kind of genres, you might say, and like the difference between like jazz and swing or blues, like they're all songs, they're all music, but they have a certain tropes and certain characteristics that cause them to be familiar. And so I kind of did a deep dive into it. On my channel, I went through the first of the seven plots, and I really tried to find each one. What's the essence of each one? And I put them on a life cycle. So I kind of think that the seven plots represent a full life cycle, starting from adolescence and going all the way to death or rebirth. And so that's kind of how I've been thinking about it. And I put it on a two mountain system, which it comes from Carl Jung, and other people like David Brooks write about it, which is the mountain of success and the mountain of legacy. So success is the first half of life, and legacy is the second half of life. It's like it's like taking and then giving back, or breathing in and breathing out, the two kind of. But one of the things that that I've been kind of now trying to work out is there a difference between these seven stories, or you could use the hero's journey, that is a sort of a quintessentially male quest story, and the feminine story? And is there a difference between the two? Does it matter whether your protagonist is a boy or a girl, or a man or a woman? And you've been exploring that. So that's kind of what I wanted to ask you, what you've learned.
Okay. So I did watch your video regarding the different I don't want to say quests, because one of them is the quest category, the different story structure,
The
like
plot
themes,
types, I call them.
elements.
Plot types. Okay. Yeah.
Plot types, yes. So, and I was thinking in my head, okay, where does the heroine's journey go in here? and I had a little bit of trouble placing it in that structure. But I'm not very good at picking apart exactly where things go. In that space, all I glean the sort of things that I do and then leave it to the professional storytellers. Like, so for me, structure wise, all of my knowledge about the heroine's journey is from Nicholas Kotar. He does a podcast called In a Certain Kingdom. He's also an author, a fantasy author, and he translates Russian and Slavic fairy tales and then writes them out and has them for his podcast, and then writes his own stuff. And so he was the one who gave me all my knowledge about the heroine's journey. And so I would talk to him next, or maybe not next, but you know, at some point, if you were wanting to go more into the technical aspect, I'll say what I did learn from him. But like there were things where I would bring up story examples. I'm like, well, what about this? Or what about this? You know, and then he would be like, well, actually, that's more this, and this is more, you know, and so I don't know it well enough yet to apply it in the
Sure.
way that he does, but I will share what I do know.
Yeah.
And then I'll share more about the feminine in general.
That's perfect.
Because
I
that has
just
helped to
watched that.
inform it.
I watched that
Wait,
interview.
oh, with Nicholas Kotar?
I watched it this morning. It was great. It was really, really good. Yes.
Oh, then it's stuff
Yeah.
you already know. Okay, well, there maybe people don't know. Okay, well,
No,
okay.
I think that you should tell me what you got from him, what
Okay.
sort of stood out from him in terms of specifically the problem that you are working through with your channel,
Mm-hmm.
and
Mm-hmm.
and how that kind of, like, maybe if you tell me kind of what you think the problem is first, and then how now these little interviews with him and other ones that you kind of, how is your perception of the, let's say, the feminine story changed, or what have you learned?
Okay, so it was very helpful to know that it's a different cycle, that the heroine's journey is, it is different from the hero's journey. And again, these are all tools that, like, just I said it again as if it was said already, but it wasn't. um these are tools to help us understand what our ancient ancestors implicitly just knew. And they may not have been able to put it into words what's happening structure wise, but we, as particularly as Western civilization inheritors, we enjoy having things categorized. And so there's always different things and different play that can happen within structures. So I'd say it's a little bit more fluid than maybe how, because I like things to follow rules. So it's sort of telling myself, and maybe your audience telling themselves, it's okay if it strays a little, you know. Like you know, they say the exception proves the rule, you know, things like that. Well, that's why that's an aphorism, because it happens. So that's just my little caveat. So one of the things, so that was really good that I was able to have that in my head, is, oh, there is a structure for the heroine's journey and it is different. And I know that like because when you look at the roles historically of men and women, they are very different. And I'm talking about like historically as an ancient. And the role of women being together and being with children and having like these sort of matrilineal sort of teaching mother to daughter sort of things like this. Whereas for men, the idea, they go out and do different things, you know, than women. And so a lot has been lost in our understanding of who we are as women. There's a lot of things, again, I sort of blame the West and kind of the Catholic Church, no offense or anything, but there's sort of categorizing things, getting them in a particular order. You have your role set out here, you have your role set out here. As opposed to, like, sometimes things can be both and sometimes one thing doesn't have to be better than another. Like, so the modern way of looking at women is, well, we're just as good as men because women can be strong too, as if masculine strength is the top. And so that's one of the reasons why I think we're getting really mixed up with what's going on with our heroines, because, you know, okay, let's bring in Captain Marvel and she's the literal strongest of all, you know, and our society looks at masculine strength, as in the strongest muscles, as the most important. And that's why I like the idea of the heroine's journey, which is, I guess I'll just do an outline of it because we didn't talk about what that was yet. So you know, whereas the quest starts off with the hero's journey of the call to adventure, but with the heroine's journey, it's a loved one is taken from her. So she's actually good. She's got her, the society's fine for her in her eyes. But then a loved one is taken away, whether that be a daughter, like the book that, and I can't remember what it's called. It might just be the heroine's journey. But that Nicholas Kotar was like, had read and looked at this structure. It uses the story of the goddess, the Greek goddess Demeter, and then her daughter Persephone being taken by Hades. So her daughter's taken. And in others, I brought up the Hans Christian Andersen story, The Snow Queen. And that's where I can't remember their names, but it's something, we'll call her Greta or whatever her name is. You know, so her best friend is taken by the Snow Queen, you know. So it doesn't have to be even family. For her, it's her best friend and neighbor, I think. But much of the time it's family that's taken. And so it's the quest to go find and save the person who's been taken. And then there are some tropes that happen. And again, these can be played with, like, so for Demeter, she puts on the sort of the garb of a hag. She takes away her, like, her motherly, like what she looked like as a mother, and then she like, oh, the crone, I guess you could say. But then I that was one of the things I was like, well, what about for Greta? I don't know if that's actually her name, but we'll just pretend. What about for her? She didn't change how she was, just a little girl, you know. And then he's like, but she loses her shoes. Her shoes, she has to leave because she gets not taken, but she gets sidetracked by a kind of witch lady who wants her to stay because she chooses to, but makes her forget her quest. And so, but she has to leave her shoes in order to, like, get out of there. So, you know, her garb changes, you know, so it doesn't have to be following exact structure, but like there are the elements that can kind of be seen in these sorts of stories. So, and then I think there's a found family sort of aspect where it's those on the margins can help. And then there's the eucatastrophe, where I'm borrowing that language from Tolkien, where it's not necessarily by you, but it's by the accidental help that you gave the random person at the beginning or in the story somewhere where you had no idea it would affect you. And then that comes back to, well, like the opposite of coming back to bite you. Like, I guess, you know, karma or fate, or like the law of the harvest kind of thing. And then that helps. And I don't actually have an example for sure for that, but you know, and then you save the person, and then they're saved. But there's an element that's you're changed, and you bring them back, but they're changed and you're changed. And it's the idea of, for women, we have our children and want them to stay and to be good, but they grow up and have to leave and go out into the world. And then we have to rearrange all of our societies to then receive them back as changed. You know, our worlds will always be shaken because our children will always grow up and go out. And so we have to learn how to deal with that. And it can be in versions, right? Again, it doesn't have to always be our children, but like that sort of, and women can go on a hero's journey. You know, it doesn't have to only be the masculine, like the feminine can, like the woman can go on the masculine journey the same way that, because that was the example that Nicholas Kotar gave, that Harry Potter has a little bit more of that heroine's journey because it's a group effort. It's not just one. It's a group together, you know, with each other. Found family, you know, how he didn't really have a family, and so he had that aspect. So, and there's also a sacrificial element that I found fascinating. The hero goes and faces the dragon, but the heroine walks, like, say, to her doom, sacrificing herself. And she doesn't go with a sword, but she goes with herself. And again, that happens in Harry Potter. He goes initially, like, completely, like, self-sacrificially, you know, and that's what Christ does. He walks to his doom, like, open-handedly, and and it's like those who live by the sword die by the sword, Peter, that kind of a thing. So even there, like, those are two men I gave the examples of, yet to sacrifice yourself in such a way is a more feminine trait, because that's what, that's the idea, like that's what mothers do. That's what Mary does. She sacrifices her child literally to the world. And so, and I know Peterson uses that imagery a lot, but he misses it. Like that's why I was confused and asked Nicholas about this. I don't know if I included it. I know I cut sometimes and keep talking with people, but I asked about Beauty and the Beast, because that's Jordan Peterson's example of the heroine's journey. But I always felt like that's just like it's just a couple's story. I just didn't feel like it was purely of the feminine's, like the feminine story. And so he said that it was more of a Nicholas said it was more of a hero's journey being observed from the woman, like the Belle, like from her beauty, she's just watching it from her perspective, and he is growing and hitting those hero's journey sort of elements.
Well,
but from the beast, the beast is the hero.
Oh,
yes, yeah. So it's more from the female is the one observing, but it's not her story. He's the one who literally transforms, right? And yeah, she has some things she changes into, but it's mostly about him and his change, right? So anyway, so that's sort of that's the structural piece that was helped to give me, oh, okay, that's what I've been looking for to sort of understand when I'm talking about stories, because we have to have these tools to help us speak about these things.
Yeah.
So I want to switch gears, but I also don't want to do it without like you being able to have the chance to talk about it or to respond.
No, I think it's great. There's a lot of things that came to mind, a lot of stories that came to mind when you were talking. One thing was Wizard of Oz. She goes, she finds, there's a sense.
Or her dog. Yeah, she needs to save her dog. Sorry. Toto.
Oh, right. That her dog gets taken away.
I'm just saying that's why she leaves. She didn't leave for her own accord. It was her dog that jumped out.
Yeah.
Oh, no, the witch stole her dog. Anyways. Sorry.
Yes, right. Yeah. I mean, what this kind of makes me think of is that I might actually be able to, or someone, not necessarily me, but could take each of the 7 plots that I'm working with and sort of show what the difference, the certain elements within the plot, whether you have a male or a female protagonist, perhaps, like one thing that you mentioned was the difference in the call to adventure, or what they call the inciting incident story. So if let's say Field of Dreams, he hears a voice and the voice says, build it. If you build it, he will come. That maybe we could say that's the masculine call to adventure. That's the call, that's the inciting incident. But the female version of that would be not that the world is a little out of whack. Like in the beginning of Field of Dreams, for example, something's not quite right with his family, with who he is. He's not quite sure who he is. But it sounds like what you're saying is it's more like in the Hunger Games, Katniss Everdeen, her sister gets called. And so she says, no, I'm going to do it.
Right.
So it's not like she needs to be called to adventure. Like basically Kevin Costner in Field of Dreams is in a period of stagnation or stasis, and he needs to break out of it in order to get to fulfill his potential, you could say. In this case, it's more like her potential is fulfilled already, but now it's disrupted and she has to restore.
Yeah.
Okay. So, I think what you're saying is there's a lot of interesting things. I like to put examples on things. Like I like to hear the theory and then I have to come up and think of some examples. So I'll have to do that. See
that's I need examples for me and my understanding of things. That's so yeah, having examples is very helpful. To kind of you have to play a game. You can't just read the instructions. You have to actually play it to really get it. It's kind of like that. It's like, I need an example, please, so I can comprehend what this like story structure is or whatever.
Yeah, no, I think that you could put examples on it. So yeah, so that's one thing I think is maybe the difference between the call to adventure or the inciting incident, you know. And then also there was something you said about what it is that the heroine notices, you know, like there's certain things that she notices that she can use for her goal, I think, which maybe are different than the things that a male hero would notice and use for his goal, you know. And one thing that you said was that they'll notice, did you say like the marginalized or like the overlooked, perhaps, you know?
So the found family is very often those on the margins. That's and with the Snow Queen example. Now, mind you, I should say, when I spoke with Nicholas, he was telling me that the more modern stories aren't quite like, usually the myths are the best, you know, to use for these, but I'm just using the Snow Queen because it kind of hit all of those things and it helped me to understand it the best. So with that's why I'm using it, because it hits those bits in each of the cycle. So for her, she comes across like she gets taken by bandits, and but I think she was trying to save a caribou or something, a magical caribou that flies or something like that. Or maybe it doesn't fly. I don't remember. But it was chained up and she was, but then these bandits like steal her or something, and they're like, this was our caribou. But then there's a girl, a kind of like she's one of the bandits, but she decides, actually, I think I'm gonna leave my life of crime. You've inspired me. And then she helps the caribou free and her and Greta free. And then she goes and helps along the way until Greta needs to go. And I think the caribou like goes with her, but to do the final like showdown with the Snow Queen at the palace of the Snow Queen. But the friends help her get so far. And it's one of these bandit girls that has decided to join her. So that's kind of a real, it feels random when you're like, oh, I guess the bandit's gonna help her, but it's not random. It's quite, it fits. And I think that's it. Yeah, that's a really cool telling. And you could even say can be almost, so the idea is that you can take the marginalized and bring them into the center and help them to be then accepted by the center. But sometimes with the more, I don't want to say toxic, with them, like the devouring mother, the side where it gets, or sometimes that side gets a little bit too activated, it can become not healthy.
Right.
So with some things you could say we're seeing in our modern culture where it's men and women, not just women, but like there's a sort of spirit of, you know, the deformed version of that tries to do it all too hard, too soon, everybody, and you can't do that. There's always going to be the margins, always. But the beautiful thing about the heroine's journey is that the heroine doesn't set out to save the margin, but she just finds it along the way in her journey, and then just does what she does. Like she's doing her thing. She's doing her like, I'm saying quest. I know that that's technically a separate thing, but it's she's on her like journey to find. Yeah, I know. I know, but I don't want to be confusing because I know that it's questing is its own thing. But anyways.
One thing you might be putting your finger on is, because I've been doing a lot of thinking lately about the difference between the protagonist and the antagonist, you know, and they're mirrors of themselves. It, you know, if you think of it in terms of like, it's like the light side and the dark side of the force, you know, so Booker here, you know, he talks about the dark masculine and the light masculine, the dark feminine and the light feminine, you know, so like there's an idea that there's maladaptive version of this, and then there's a correct version of it, you know. And so
Yeah.
I'm thinking of Wizard of Oz. Like, she finds the Tin Man, the Scarecrow, and the Lion, and they each have
The
a
Cowardly
fault.
Lion. Yeah.
Right. And so they're in the they're like remainders. They don't belong in society because they're lacking something, you know. And so she sees that, though, and she brings them in, and that's her found family, I think, in that story, you know. So there's something about, usually, and this is what I would look for, if I was going to tease this out a little bit more, is usually you can find the correct and the incorrect version of something in the story, you know. And the way I look at it is in terms of like the evil stepmother and Cinderella. You know, it's like the stepmother and the stepsisters represent the wrong way to do it, and over the course of the story, she learns the right way to do it. So the right way to rule a kingdom as the queen is what she learns in the end. The wrong way is what we're presented with at the very, very beginning with the wicked stepmother, you know. So I wonder if that's kind of like what it is. It's like the way that an antagonist, the way that a dark feminine antagonist would wreak havoc in the world is a certain way, you know, versus, you know.
I'm even thinking the Wicked Witch of the West, the way, and even the East, the one who got smashed by the house. She enslaved like the Munchkins, right? And then the Wicked Witch of the West had enslaved the monkeys and the Winkies, and that's the wrong way. Don't enslave. I know it sounds kind of like duh, of course, but it's
well, she's wielding
it's
them.
what she was doing is
she's
bad.
Using, yes, like there's a sense that if you take someone that's missing something in their life, and then you sort of fix it and put them back right or something, now you have control over them. And so you could think, you know, she's like wielding the monkeys or the munchkins for her will, for what she for her little kingdom that is sort of a maladaptive kingdom, rather than just restoring that. So, but Dorothy restores those three to health, like, but she doesn't now say, okay, now you have to do whatever I tell you, you know, like she doesn't take it that far. I don't know. It's probably something like that.
Yeah, no, I agree. Also, I do want to pop back to the you bringing up the Hunger Games. I do think there's one thing I wanted to mention that I think is missing in there, even though it's and obviously, like, it's not necessarily like I do think it's good the way that the beginning starts. Like, that's a very good heroine's journey space that is cultivated there. But the one thing I do think is really lacking in the character of Katniss Everdeen is the feminine. She's very masculinized, although she does go for her sister. That is a very feminine part of the story, but she doesn't really embrace her femininity ever, and it's fine to start off that way, but she is always uncomfortable with it until literally the very end, when she's finally, like, in like the prologue, okay, she married PETA and she had kids finally. So that's one thing that I thought was a little like lacking in that, or that I think was a shame, because I think of the story, if she would have embraced a little bit more of her femininity as strengths, I think that would have elevated the story that much more. I do think it's a good story, but anyways.
One thing I did notice with that is that her strategy, once she gets into the Hunger, I didn't read the books, I just watched the movies. So
okay.
But when she gets into the Hunger Game, she does find a found family. She finds the
You're right, that is there. Yeah.
You know, like I don't want to remember if it's a little girl or someone, like basically people who in this kind of like dog eat dog world, they would have died right away, but she uses those.
She finds the most marginalized, the most vulnerable.
Yeah. And the choice of weapon as a bow and arrow instead of, like, say, a sword, maybe
you're right,
you know. So I see, what I think is that in our modern world, the archetypes are kind of there in our subconscious, even if consciously we might have let's say an ideology that contradicts it or something. So it still will come out. But I think what you're right is that there's a sense of her not being comfortable with something about that role or something about that essence, maybe. And even while she's still kind of like, I think in certain elements using it, but there is
that mothering kind of thing coming out, seeing her with her sister, and then with the little girl that she kind of bonds with in the games. But yeah, whenever it talks about her feelings, she's always like she tried to have a love triangle, but I mean the author, she tried to make it a love, but there was no love because she kept on denying any feelings for anybody. So
right.
so it's, you can have both. The idea is for me that I'm like, you can have her be both, all those things. You can have her be, so it's not bad. It's just, I think that adding certain elements would have made it just that much better.
Yeah, and there might also be something in the sense of like a cognitive dissonance when the message of our culture these days might be to deny these strengths, use other strengths, use masculine strengths instead of feminine strengths or something. And so there would be maybe a conflict within the character, or even within the author, maybe even in the subconscious of the author.
I think there was. No, I do. I do think that there was. Yeah. Like, I understand she didn't want to make her like a femme fatale kind of a character. But that's the thing about character arcs, is you can have one in romantic spaces, and not just in, there was an arc in her to not just fight for her immediate family and her found family, but to fight for everybody. That was great. But then you can also have other character arcs, I think, as well. And I'm kind of getting nitpicky, so we can move on.
Yeah. Well, I'm really fascinated with this idea of the goal of the story being to reorient the world instead of to reorient yourself, which is, I never thought about that before. But I think it's true in the sense of the feminine maybe vision looking and saying, well, this is how the world should be, but it's not, and so you need to change, or like the world needs to change, versus something about the hero starts with a flaw. That's maybe one thing that's different, is a very, very obvious character flaw in the male hero's journey starting off. Like, it's better if there's but whereas like there's nothing wrong with Belle at the beginning of,
yeah, she's great. Everyone else kind of sucks, but yeah, she's fine.
So I wonder if there's something about
Although, wait, we did say that Beauty and the Beast wasn't a good heroine's journey.
Well, yes,
but I understand your meaning. Yeah.
Or there's nothing really wrong with Dorothy in the beginning of Wizard of Oz. There's
right. She loves her dog. Yeah, yes. Who doesn't love Cinderella? A girl who loves her dog.
Cinderella's locked in a room. She's a great person, but she's in circumstances. So I wonder, if there's something about that, something about the role that someone has in their life, is not necessarily to become to overcome a flaw that you have, but to understand what needs to be done, what needs to happen in the world in order for the world to be flipped right side up or something like that.
Right. And that's the thing, is also to remember that it never will be the same again. Like, because the heroine's journey sort of is like, but wait, it was good. So like, can we go back? Like where I need to write my world again, because someone's been taken from me now.
Yeah.
But when you come back, it's not, yes, hard things happen that ended up for the good, and things are different. But then this is what I learned from that one conversation. Like, when Demeter gets her daughter back, but she loses her for 4 months of the year as a compromise. you know? So like, yes, she does have her back, but her not in the same way. And so even though it's not going to like, even though the world, it wasn't her, it wasn't Demeter didn't do the thing to make her world change. But when she goes out, has this journey, comes back, the world has changed though. And but I think that she goes to the gods and has them help to make the decision to have that compromise happen. So the world was very rearranged. That's why there's winter. Those 4 months that Persephone is in the underworld. But the thing is, the myths were not scientific explanations that people had, which is sort of a thing that we think in our modern time. Oh, so that's why there's winter. Okay, like they didn't think that about their myths.
Mm-hmm.
There weren't little like science explanations. But the world has changed, and it's but it hasn't. It's both. So we're I'm not trying to like say contradict what you were saying or anything, but it's just important to remember that the world, you didn't start off wanting to change the world necessarily. It was something was someone was taken, and then you get it back for the better, but it's not the same.
Hmm.
And it's hard. It's a hard, and
Yeah.
even with Lord of the Rings, I would say that's kind of more of a heroine's journey in a way, even though there are elements of both. But the group, like the fellowship,
Mm-hmm.
there's so many people, and then coming back to the Shire, it is always going to be different,
Mm-hmm.
like very different.
Yeah.
Although there was a bit of a reprieve when they came and righted the wrongs of Saruman, but like
Yeah.
it is, you can't go back.
Mm-hmm.
And that was Tolkien and his world and his small town. It's like, sorry, the Industrial Revolution has come and it will never go back.
Yeah.
And it's sad. It's kind of sad for some of these stories. It's not just kind of sad. It's like, oh, sorry, your daughter's going to be in Hades for the next 4 months. And it's like, oh, sorry, like you're the how green was my valley sort of thing is not green anymore. Sorry
Yeah.
about that. But
Yeah.
you saved the world though, Frodo. But
Yeah.
you didn't save yourself either. Sorry, you've got to go. And
Yeah.
then we're all left here.
Mm-hmm.
So it's but it's sad when kids grow up. That's
Yeah.
sad.
Right.
Like it's a sad thing, but it's inevitable and it is what it is. And then they'll have their own kids, and it's so
Yeah.
we've got to be able to we have to be able to go through these cycles to make sense of them and be ultimately okay with them.
Mm-hmm. Well, do you think that maybe, because I'm always trying to think what's the reason for the story to exist? If you think of
Mm-hmm.
the trope of maiden, mother, matriarch, the
Mm-hmm.
three archetypes.
That's a nice way of saying crone. Nice.
A nice way of saying what? Oh, crone.
The crone. I've never heard it said that way instead of. So
Oh, well,
that's nice. I'll
they
use
both,
that.
all three start with M. So,
Yeah. Yeah. Actually, that's
um,
better. It's better. Yeah.
but
Alliteration all the way.
do you think maybe it's kind of, there's a sense of that each of the three stages that
Mm-hmm.
you have to put on a new persona for that each one, so you have to kind of
Mm-hmm.
settle into, now you're going to move into the next stage, like
Mm-hmm.
you were a maiden, now you're a mother, you were a mother,
Mm-hmm.
now you're a matriarch, and there's a
Mm-hmm.
loss with each
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
stage. And I wonder, maybe the bittersweetness of these stories, I wonder if you could put them in each of those three, like this one is about going from
Mm-hmm.
adolescence to being a maiden, and this one is from going from being a maiden to a mother, and this one from a mother to a matriarch, or something like that.
Yes, that is interesting. I've never thought of it that way, but yeah, that's something that I'll have to think about, and I don't have any answers for that one. But it's good to point those things out so then I can think about those for the future, and you can as well. You
Well,
can let
see,
me
because
know.
that's what I do with the masculine stories that I'm working on,
Mm-hmm.
with the two mountains.
Mm-hmm.
you know, is like the
Yeah.
first part is like you're gaining success. And each of those stories, overcoming the monster, rags to riches, and comedy, are like finding your place in the world of competence and being able to accomplish things and have a little kingdom, you know, like you rule justly, that sort of thing. And then, but when you get to the end of your life, you're worried about legacy and you're worried about giving back. And so that's where the rebirth and the quest stories belong, I think, you know. So I kind of I do put them on a life cycle, because I think that if you notice that the stories that we tell children, and then the stories that we tell young adults, and then the stories that are kind of for later in life, you know, my sense is that they do kind of fall into these certain categories. But I'm just working it out for myself. You know?
Well, some of them are, I would say, like the rags to riches. That one is pretty easy to have for both. Like, because like Cinderella is like the feminine rags to riches.
Right. And then
I know the
Aladdin
Prince and the Pauper is the Prince. Yeah. So those ones are pretty easy, but I don't know about the monster one. Like that one would be more on the masculine scale. But again, I'm categorizing these pretty hardcore right now. So, and we do that so that we can talk about them. And that's fine. But that is one thing I do want to mention about the feminine is, and this is why Jonathan Peugeot is quite reticent to talk about it, as well as Nicholas Kotar. Like he's like they don't, they do it. They both have said in separate videos, or I guess Nicholas said on his podcast, but Jonathan said this in a video. They don't like having to talk about the feminine and explain it, because the moment you talk about it and explain it, you have masculinized it. Because the feminine is implicit and the masculine is explicit. And so the minute you make something explicitly clear, it is then masculinized. So, but we don't know these things anymore. Like we don't live out doing the washing as a group. And by we, I mean women. We don't go down to whatever water source, like the river or the well, and we don't have our weaving parties, or, you know, we don't have these things that we do collectively as women, and where it's just lived. And that's the thing about the feminine, it is it's a practice. Like you don't mean to, it's practiced. And participation. And I don't mean practice like I'm practicing to do something, you know, I mean, it's like, it's a participation thing. And I mean, the masculine is too, but it's just, it works well to, you can explain the masculine because that's a masculine thing. But yeah, with the feminine, it's a look, you know, like that's, there's something we don't understand nowadays about that thing. Like I didn't, when I don't, you know, even talking about it, I'm like, I don't think I really even know that. But that was actually, I remember seeing that in Memoirs of a Geisha, in the trailer. I just remember they really highlighted it. It's like, just, you can stop someone just with a look, you know, and it showed the guy falling off his bicycle because he ran into a wall or something, or, you know, from her, that's how she knew she had mastered the arts of being a geisha, because she had the look thing. And so that's not with words, you know. And so there's something about that's slightly taken away when you speak it out loud. And but we have to talk about it, because we don't understand symbolism anymore, because we're not participating with it. Like the very fact that we call things religion and categorize the religious life versus the secular life, that means we're not participating in the way that our ancestors did. You know, they would never call going to a temple being religious. It was life, you know. It was they didn't have a word for it. It's like, it's just, you lived it. It was part of life. And so I do understand that we need to talk about it, because we don't understand. We don't just get it just by living our lives the way that we live them, because our lives are very, very different from how things used to be. So I think it's not a bad thing to figure out and to talk about the feminine, but it's important, again, to sort of, this is just one of those caveats that I also want to just put out there, like, oh, let's just remember that it's something that is a participatory thing, that is implied, it's all implicit, a little bit more than the masculine side of things, and which is why it's easier to get the masculine journeys, I think, because they are very, very explicit.
Yeah.
Sorry, not in the way that that sounds.
No,
they're explained well. They're easy
yes.
to explain.
I'm just thinking of the story of Esther. So apparently, there's a sense of her always being under a veil in the story.
Oh, okay.
She's veiled inside the name of Isis, which is the god of sex and war, apparently, the Persian name, whereas Haman is not Haman, Mordecai is known around town as Mordecai the Hebrew. So he's like explicitly, and then she doesn't mention that she's who she is,
right.
Right. So there's a sense that she settles into a role of being underneath its veil and underneath a different name, right? And then, but she uses that to basically enter into spaces that the person who's out explicit, Mordecai the Jew, or Mordecai the
cannot enter,
would never. So like if you watch the 300 and you see all of those Spartans fighting against Xerxes, and they can't even get with 1,000 miles of his palace. And she,
that Xerxes is real interesting. Yeah, he's pretty terrifying, that's for sure.
But imagine, all of that, all of those Spartans, they can't even get close to the seat of his power, whereas she walks
cool, yeah.
She walks right in, like his scepter, which is kind of the symbol for like all of the entire power of the whole empire, the biggest, most powerful person in the known world at the time. And he lowers it so that she can come in to talk with him. And then she eventually uses that influence, which is kind of like smuggled in under the veil, under the name, under not revealing things until certain moments. And then, but she uses it to save her people, So there's a sense of a very different, you might say, skill set, or, certain times call for that method rather than the Spartan method or the straightforward method,
Totally. Oh, that's really interesting. I never have heard that. And so, yeah, that's very, I'm going to think about that. So I've done a lot of like ladies battle studies on Esther. So,
oh, you have?
Like, that wasn't ever explained. I mean, it kind of was, but in those symbolic terms. That's very cool.
There's
so that's the thing, is the underneath, the hidden, and it's not bad necessarily. It's the thing that the mystery, I guess you could say.
And there's also something to do with like going in between boundaries that stop, like I'm thinking of Rahab, who lives in the wall of Jericho.
Right. Yeah, it's another good one.
So she's like a little portal between these two worlds of power. Like there's the siege, people doing the siege outside of the wall, and then there's Jericho inside of the wall, and then she's the one that can go like in between the two. So there's something about that too. The fact of not doing a frontal like posturing and it's me versus you, kind of like how two guys will kind of with their chests out or something like that. And the idea of
it's
kind of
disarming.
Yes, right. And then the question might be, how do you use that once you learn it? Once a female character learns that, how does she use it? Does she use that power for good, or does she use it for, maybe there's examples of how she might use it the wrong way, and these might be antagonist figures, or the right way, I don't know. I think maybe the step sisters in Cinderella are examples. They haven't figured out how to use it at all yet, but the stepmother is someone who has, but learned how to use it in a tyrannical way or something like that. I don't know.
Yes, yeah, yeah, in a maladaptive way. Yeah. Yeah. And also, yeah, the just being jealous of Cinderella's like youth and beauty, and not being okay with her maybe the mantle of motherhood. Do you remember you brought that up about the different mantles
Hmm.
being like the small
Right.
deaths for of each
Yes.
space? And it's like maybe she um
Wants to be the maiden still.
perhaps, I mean, she doesn't want to be the, oh, or even you could say matriarch, like she's the mother of her daughters, but she doesn't want to be like, I mean, I don't know. I don't know this kind of stuff as well as some, but I will say she doesn't want to extend that motherhood over to. She doesn't want to be at the head of a family. She
Hmm.
doesn't want to. So it could be maybe matriarch, like
Hmm.
technically, because the like the
Yeah.
head of that family, or it could be motherhood as well, or
Yeah.
instead of like extending that, you know, like blanket of motherhood, bringing her in, like
Yeah.
she only wants to have her own daughters. So that's the selfish aspect of like only me and mine.
Hmm.
But she looks better. There's never, it doesn't say that she's ugly, right? It's the ugly stepsisters.
Yes.
So it could be something even to do with like that jealousy. It's not the same as Snow White's mother, but who was actually her real mother in the original storytelling. I don't
Hmm.
know if you know, she wasn't a stepmother, she was an actual mother and was jealous
Really?
of her daughter. Yeah, in the original.
Because she's fairer.
They
Yeah.
Yeah, yeah.
Hmm.
So I know that that's more the Snow White's like aspect, but
Yeah.
it could be something to do with that now. Anyway, for her,
Hmm.
yeah.
Wow. Well, this has been amazing because
Hmm.
I learned a lot. And
Well, I mean, I know sometimes when you're talking, you just like, I didn't know I knew that. It just sort of,
well,
you spitballing and things come out that you didn't realize were there. So
yeah.
yeah, I
Well,
love doing this kind of
I
stuff.
think you've been exploring it for a while now. And so
Hmm.
I think what you're doing is really good because nobody's really choosing to look at it from that perspective. Um,
Mm.
in the way that you are. I haven't not found anybody yet that's really kind of looking at um let's really dig into the essence of what femininity is or what the feminine archetypes are. Um, people just aren't thinking that way these days. So I think it's refreshing.
Well,
Great.
looks like hopefully we'll be starting a trend, because I think it's half of the world. So it'd be
Right.
good to know what all of the journeys look like, and understanding. I think it would bring an understanding between us, like it would bring us together more to learn and understand what does this look like and why.
Yeah.
So yeah, I thank you. I very much enjoy this kind of thing, and looking at different aspects with different people who are on the same journey as me, looking into narrative and understanding what does it mean, how do we look at narrative now versus the past, and what does it mean the way we look at it, and all these things. So yeah, this is so wonderful. Thanks for writing me, and I'm glad that we chatted, because I'll have to look back and be like, what did I say that was different that I didn't know before? It's hard to remember when you're in it.
Yeah.
So
Well, yeah, it's great to meet you. I'm sure we'll run into each other since we're kind of in the same circles now. I think a little bit.
for sure.
Sure. And yeah, so I'll put this up on my channel and see what people say about it.
Looking forward to it. Thank you for having me.
Okay, great. I'm going to stop the recording now.